So the outsourcing was announced in May 2012. It came as a surprise to the Students' Union, as it did to pretty much the rest of the campus community. Since May 2012, obviously the Students' Union released an initial response outlining some of the concerns that we had for students around these proposals, mainly stuff around accountability, changes to services, to pricing, loads of issues. Since then, we've had regular meetings with University Management. We've gone to them with proposals for consultation, we've gone to them with requests for information, even really basic information about how these services will be accountable to students, what kind of say students will have in shaping the services, all sorts of stuff like that, and pretty much any request we've had has been rebutted. We haven't been given the information that we feel that we need to be able to do our jobs to represent students and make sure that anything that's happening to the campus is done in the best interest of students. And obviously that's been a massive concern for us.
Why the university's doing it, because in the Q&A sessions with John Duffy they just told us why they weren't doing it, which included they weren't doing it to be more efficient, they weren't doing it to improve services, they basically weren't doing it for any reasonable kind of motivation.
But most recently, and specifically in an interview that John Duffy and Michael Farthing, I think it was Michael Farthing, gave to the BBC, he explicitly said that cost effectiveness was not the driving reason for the outsourcing, and that it was mainly to cater for a very large growth expansion of the university, which itself I think is problematic.
It's not really clear what is driving privatisation, partly because the motivations that have been expressed are themselves not quite transparent, both in terms of the financial figures that have been provided and in terms of the claims related to efficiency. Examples that are being used are quite thin. For example, the idea that we need to have vegetarian options is one of the big elements that's often emphasized, and it's difficult to really take that seriously.
The reasons that are given by John Duffy, by Michael Farthing, by other individuals in other institutions that are privatising vary wildly depending on when they're asked and how they're feeling. So there's no consistent argument from them which suggests that they're coming up with excuses to cover up for the fact that actually they believe ideologically that this is the answer, that these services should be private, they should be about profit.
And I mean the reasons are based on an ideology that a private company will run things in a better way, and they claim that the campaign is ideological, but actually their whole reasoning is ideological because they're not basing it on anything.
Well, fundamentally for me, the incentives for management is its profit margins. So for them, they move from public body to public body, so say university to university or to hospital, whatever, implementing these schemes, getting reputations, taking higher wages as they go from university to university, and we've seen them come and we go. I mean, I've been here since 2007 and I've seen many managers come and go.
Well, the reason they give is that they want to save money on these services so they can reinvest them in growth. So it's basically the reason they're giving, which is possibly partly the reason, is about the expansion of the university. They want to add 1,000 extra students every year, so that means more teaching buildings, more residences, and obviously more staff. So it's about reinvesting the money in the growth of the university, but it's also obviously about cost saving. Saving costs is part of the whole approach of finding money to reinvest. So. And the cost savings will come from lower pensions for the workers, lower pay when they're transferred to the new companies. What's going on is certainly not a result of government cuts, because actually the cuts in government funding have been replaced by students paying their own tuition fees. So universities like Sussex still have just as much income as they had before. The only difference is it's coming from the student paying as a consumer rather than through the taxpayer. In fact, Sussex is quite a well-resourced university that under the new fees regime has held up quite well. So, but it is a response to Universities UK and national initiatives which are fairly ideological and come from the government, which are about having a more privatised, marketised education system. So there's very little evidence that it's financially necessary. the finances at universities like Sussex are holding up quite well. It seems to be more a push towards a different type of education and a different type of university which is more market oriented.
The situation, the ability to redistribute the profits from in-house services, and I think it relates more to the fact of the ability to manage different services working together under the same institution, under the same market pressures, protected by the same guarantees in terms of pensions, in terms of availability of personnel, in terms of financial markets. I mean, the university has already been a victim of such events in the past. So protecting the management, the financial management of the university as a whole, I think, is extremely important. And management can use the argument that other services are already outsourced on campus, but the fact that they're already outsourced, I think, doesn't provide a good enough argument to do even more.
Well, if universities are going to reinvest all profit earned back into the university, then what necessity is there for having outsourced, to outsource services to for-profit companies? The point is that before, it's not that universities haven't had for-profit enterprises. So, for example, if you think about Oxford University, it has Oxford University Press. The difference is that all profit generated by Oxford University Press is reinvested in the academic activities of Oxford University. The reason why the current situation will be different in terms of outsourcing is that the university generates money to pay for these outsourced services. And so money is actually going from the university to these companies, as opposed to the profit from companies being reinvested in the university. And so what one needs to do really here is follow the money to determine how any surplus that's generated is invested and reinvested in the university or not.
What CHUPE states is that it will protect any employees' contracts under a transfer, with exception of any economic, technical or industrial reason, which basically means everything. Any exception is valid to not only to change the contracts, but also to legitimize redundancies. So at this outsourcing process, redundancies are, it's ensured that there will be no redundancies under CHUPE, but under CHUPE there is basically very little assurance here.
In an effort to outsource, what you're doing is exchanging one provider to a single monopoly global provider. So the idea that a monopoly on campus can provide more choice, or be more efficient, or offer greater competition just doesn't really hold.
And one thing that is abundantly clear, I know a lot of students have kind of been talking about the possibility that there might be a Starbucks on campus and stuff like that now. But from actually talking to the staff that are involved in this process, it's pretty clear that something like that is not going to happen at all. Because I think it's important to remember that all of these catering outlets are now going to go to one single provider, and that's not going to be a franchise. So.
Indicates, and this is vital and one of our main arguments as well, is in an institution such as a university, this is so different. These services are an inherent part of your university experience. They are not just some service you go to, these are people that you come into contact with multiple times throughout your day over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So in the university experience and community enhancement point of view, this is very important, but from an outsourcing point of view as well. These services provide an image of the university, an inherently essential image. This is the image, the Sussex experience, that we like to call it, that you sell to new students. This is what you provide to new students to bring them in. And as much as you like to talk about catering and talk about sponsors, the main income of a university is tuition fees. You need students.
When a private provider comes in, they have a certain way of doing things, and they'll try to use the way they do things as a way to change what's being done on the ground, and that obviously will mean some impact, a significant impact on the staff, a significant impact in terms of what kind of services are delivered. Often the very services that are being privatized, these have grown organically out of the operations of the university, and so they tend to reflect more specifically the needs of people on the ground here.
I think the general effects on the campus community will be that it will disintegrate. If you look at the campus community now, porters know the students who work in their halls, security know the students, the first years who live on campus, and in a privatisation scenario, those people would be shifted constantly, which would mean that they'd never become particularly familiar with any faces, and I think that that would actually be a massive loss in terms of community. And also, the workers that work on campus now are a community in and of themselves, which is separate to the students, and that community would be completely destroyed because they'd lose their jobs or have their jobs changed in terms of their rotation.
I've been working here 11 years. The university is a community. The students aren't just customers, they're your friends, supporters, especially during this time. And you get to know people. I still get students coming back that were here like 5-6 years ago, because you develop relationships. It's not just, that's a customer, do your job. That's what university is. It's about community. It's about having that sort of trust with the students and the staff. And that happens all over campus, not just in the residencies. It happens with the plumbers and all that, and down in the bottom end, the caterers and all the rest of it. The catering staff, I've seen family flats go down to the catering, and they know they want halal food, they know the names of the kids. It's a community, but that's going to stop completely. A private company come in, you're told to do a job, you're not there to make friends, you're there to perform a role, be paid for it, probably less, and then be sent on your way. The community of Sussex will just disappear. There will be students in lectures, and then there'll be customers in all the other areas that are services right now for the students. So yeah, I mean, working for a private company, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to work for the university and to be part of this community.
Very different. I'm very proud to work in the public sector, supporting public good. My main duty, as I understand it, is to the students under my care. I'm employed by the university to fulfil that role. I don't have any obligation to shareholders. I have no obligation to help anyone increase their profits, as I understand the job. So it will change massively. My job goes from being in the public interest to being in the private interest of the very wealthy.
The administration has claimed this as being a success, as a proof that privatisation can operate very smoothly and successfully. I think what's very striking about that is not simply the fact that it seems to contradict the experience of both parents and staff on the ground, but also that there's been no consultation from management to see whether it was a success. We haven't been asked what we think about it. There's been no, the staff haven't been asked about their experience of it. It's simply been declared in a quite arbitrary way.
It's not just, this isn't just happening at Sussex. I think this is happening around the UK, in as much as it's part of a process of the marketisation of higher education across the country. So this isn't a standalone thing done by an evil management team. I think, let's take free courses for example. They are the cleaners and caterers and the security staff in the University of London, and they were outsourced, and now they are fighting for free demand, which are essentially sick pay, pensions and holiday, and their fight is symptomatic of what the workers who are possibly going to be outsourced here will have to go on to fight.
Queen Mary University is one that stands out for me because it was privatised over 10 years ago, the cleaning services, in a university environment. And the cleaning services, first of all, the quality of service dropped instantly, and that was noted by students and staff. And secondly, the working conditions of staff was immediately lowered to minimum wage in central London, where if you're living on minimum wage, you're not really living at all. You're on the breadline. They used to get the London living wage, and after a few years of complaints from staff and students and campaigns to bring it back in-house. In 2006, or might have been 7, don't quote me on that, it was brought back in-house by the university. The wages were raised to the London living wage, and now it's one of the key symbols that the university, Queen Mary University itself, is using to show how good of an employer it is, by saying that actually we are providing the London living wage for our staff. And I mean, that's an example where privatisation, on the one hand, reduces the quality of service for the service users, such as staff and students, whilst at the same time lowering the working conditions of staff. I mean, similarly, at the Royal County Hospital in Brighton, lowered wages, lower job security and pension contributions was one of the first things that happened when Sodexo, a private outsourcing company, took over during Christmas in 2012, and they took over catering and cleaning. And I mean, that's only 2 examples of hundreds across the country.
Everybody's fearful of what will happen, and everybody's fearful the relationship between students and staff will break down. Because right now it's a nice place to work. Well, it's getting worse, but it's a nice place to work, and you get on with the students, and the students get on with us.
One thing that they did agree to doing was doing some question and answer sessions for students. But myself, the other officers, and I think pretty much all the students that went along to those sessions felt that it wasn't really an opportunity for them to have any input into what was going on. It was just them kind of being told what the university were planning to plough ahead with, and I know a lot of students were really not happy or impressed with the outcome of those.
They say that they've organised meetings with staff where they could consult them on the process. However, when those meetings have taken place, they've been meetings where management have informed staff of what is going ahead. The first meeting of consultation was taken after the decision had been made to outsource services. So the entire process is a facade, it's a sham, in order to make people feel like it's been dealt with democratically, but actually people haven't been consulted at all.
Every formal committee that we can think of, we've brought up the issues, so in council, in Senate, in the meetings that we have with the Vice-Chancellor's executive group, we've flagged up the issues there. And we've also taken them a proposal for consultation and how they should consult with the student body, and that was done before Christmas. But as of yet, we haven't even had a chance to meet with them and to get any feedback on what they even think about that, which is a concern for us, and it's something we really, really want to work on and push through.
At the beginning of Senate, there's a report by the chair, who's Michael Farthing, and he was doing a bit of a report about the update on the process or whatever. And so I asked, and then he asked, are there any questions? And I asked if I could have the floor for 2 minutes, and I read out a statement highlighting all the concerns, what the campus community want, rather than a few individuals in management. And basically, that was completely ignored, and after I read out, I wasn't interrupted, but after I read out my 5-minute statement, I was, they just moved on.
Well, going back to the start of it, the senior managers of the university dragged us into a meeting and just told us that we were being privatised.
The first I knew of it was the first anyone beyond VSEC really knew of it. We were called into a meeting in Bhambra House on the 10th of May last year and told it was going ahead. That was it. That was the consultation.
After that, the only personal consultation was being offered a meeting with special outsourcing people. We were actually not from the university, they were from outside the university. So I didn't go to them because they could only answer general questions. They couldn't answer the specifics that members of staff like myself want to know.
Basically, I belong to a union. So a lot of the messages that I've got about the inverted commas consultation process have come through the union. And to me it seems, whilst the powers that be are prepared to negotiate, in inverted commas, on the terms and conditions of people once they've been privatised is happening, the whole idea of the privatisation hasn't been negotiated at all.
The information that's been provided to the unions all the way through, that's been provided to the students, that's been provided to the campaign, all the way through since the process began, has been very, very Spartan in nature. You know, what information has been yielded has really been yielded after constant pressure. But there's a lot of information that we've applied constant pressure for that still hasn't been released. So there are the names of the bidders, there are the numbers of the bidders, there are the dates associated with the process, the competitive dialogue process, the bidding process, that we haven't been provided with, all the way down the line. You know, what information has been yielded, I mean, some has been provided only after freedom of information requests. Well, that shouldn't happen.
The secrecy around the names of the providers, the terms of the contracts being negotiated, and around the actual outsourcing plan. So the outsourcing was discussed at a council meeting, but the council meeting was never made public. Council members have had to sign a declaration saying that they were not allowed to disclose any of the discussions at the council meeting.
The much vaunted by management dialogue that's taken place with constructive meetings with the unions, and they'll give a list as long as your arm of dates and times and attendees of meetings, but we have no minutes of those meetings. So, you know, in terms of the upshot and the proof, really, that little has changed, if anything, in the proposals. You know, it's their word against our word. You know, we are saying this cannot qualify as a meaningful dialogue and a constructive consultation exercise, because, you know, I mean, it's as if they had wheeled the whole proposals out yesterday, because they haven't changed since May last year. Where's constructive?
This was a meeting of a student, a senior executive board of my own school. So this is a board of the directors of the school, where important matters are being discussed. In that meeting, we were told what our figures for growth would be for our school, and I questioned them. And in the minutes of the meeting, there was no mention of the reservations which had been expressed. I asked to have a correction, and I didn't get anywhere. So eventually, after a long correspondence, I had to come to the conclusion that the minutes would never be corrected. I would never manage to get it included in the minutes. That not only me, but actually others had kind of queried whether the figures were attainable. Because I have the feeling that whenever we express dissent, it's very difficult to have the dissent being recorded, as a result of which the official story becomes that everybody is behind the plans, that there is no dissent within the university, that there is enthusiasm, for example, for the student growth. And you can see that, for example, in the registrar, in a chat in The Guardian, saying that, you know, there is enthusiasm for the agenda for growth across campus.
Well, on day one, when we introduced the badges, the catering staff, for example, were told that they couldn't wear badges just because it didn't form part of their uniform. I mean, it appears odd that if you look around, there are uniformed staff, be they security, porters, whatever, that are wearing badges. So that does seem to be a particular decision of a particular management line among the 235. But it goes further than that. I mean, there's kind of, I'll say suggestion, but it was certainly more than that, that staff should not attend meetings that were being organised on their behalf. When the badges were introduced, I used it for some time at the bottom of my email in the early stages of the campaign. I was the only one using it, and when it was spotted by management, you know, they actually bigged the issue up. by asking me to remove the badge, which I did from my day job email signature.
Another issue is all student emails. Unlike other student unions across the country, the student union at the University of Sussex doesn't have that ability. And that's a massive issue, the fact that we are completely unable to contact all of our members. And I know in the past the Student Union has requested this from the university. It's been going on for absolutely ages now. They've given us the postal addresses of our members, and that's really unfair, and it makes absolutely no sense when the university itself is able to very easily contact absolutely everyone, and they are purposefully blocking our ability to do that. And of course, I mean, there's arguments that people don't want to be spammed, but the Student Union wouldn't do something like that. We'd send out things that are important to our membership. And it's also really important to know that when it was the emergency members meeting just before Christmas and we were going to discuss the issue of outsourcing, usually the university agrees to send out emails about members meetings like that, but on that occasion they refuse to. And I think that's a massive issue if we're unable to tell students about our democratic processes and how they can get involved in decisions that are ultimately going to then shape the direction that the Student Union is taking.
I think ever since the 1960s there's been a strong sense that students are as much a part of the university and ought to have a say in the running of that university. That if we recognise the university as a community that functions beyond simply its core activities of teaching, research and administration, but that it has wider public functions, then why wouldn't everybody who has an interest in the success of the university be part of it? And that doesn't involve only staff and students and those who work within the university, but I would suggest also the local communities within which universities are embedded, because they also have an investment in how the university operates.
They've been very unresponsive, and they've done the exact opposite. Instead of engaging in dialogue, they've put an injunction on campus until September prohibiting all forms of protest, which is completely Machiavellian and surreal.
There's a real double standard there, in that they don't know who I am, and a good manager goes out to rally the troops once in a while. I've never seen them visit me at my job, not even on the day they arrive. So on the one hand, they clearly don't know or care to know about my role and what I do. However, they still have no problems labelling the role as essential services when it comes to snow days, and they want to keep the university open.
On an individual level, it's almost impossible to feel valued for the job we do, because I don't feel that the job I do is actually known by management.
We're just people that turn up and do the job we're told to do. They've got no concept of community on this campus at all. The funny thing is that when they need us most, then we're valuable. The last time it snowed, the snow day, all the staff down at Sussex House got sent home, and essential services had to stay. That was catering, the porters, some of the cleaners and some of the management, because we were essential services for the students. So yeah, we're essential when they want us to be essential, but the rest of the time we're just a commodity to sell off.
And alongside what gets valued monetary-wise, there's a kind of more invisible value provided by people who are employed with a direct stake to the university and not employed to an outside organisation, which then comes to work on a kind of freelance basis at the university. There's a greater stake in a community if we're all employed by the same Sussex University and we all belong together in it, which maybe doesn't translate into a monetary value in the accounting books, but would add to the student experience more broadly.
Some ideas.
Okay, I think it's interesting that it has come up recently, because originally management was very clear and insisted that the outsourcing exercise had nothing to do with economic justification. the problem was not economical. The idea was not to save money. That's what they said to the trade unions over and over again. I don't know why they have had to change their justification. It may be, but I'm not sure, it may be that they realized that the story they were telling about the fact that the quality of services would improve has not been accepted across campus and has been actually highly contested. And so as that justification maybe didn't stood anymore, maybe they turned to something else. But I cannot say for sure. So the question arises as to why suddenly there is a deficit. And I think that would be a very good question to ask accountants.
You know, basically the way they arrive at these conclusion has a lot to do with the way or the whole template by which they allocate costs and determine revenues, the income that's generated by various units. One of the key things in terms of the creche, the nursery, was very striking, I think, at the time, was that claims were made about losses that the nursery had. And it was, the numbers that were provided were never really transparent because they included costs from the main central administrative and managerial unit that were basically distributed amongst the various units of the university, and that meant that the creche itself had to pay for this administrative structure. So I think it's, you know, in a way you can justify the idea that various units like departments pay for this central administration, because of course it plays a big role in terms of the operations of the university. But when you're looking at the nursery, or when you're looking at catering, when you're looking at parking or things like that, where it's not really clear in what sense you should, you know, why you should include the cost of this central management in the operations to determine whether it's a financial burden or not on the university. And this is what's been done. So that, I think at that level it's not very transparent how the numbers are being used at times.
According to documents released under FOI relating to the business case for doing this, that's not actually you know, what is stated. That's not to say that there's other documents that would counteract that, but it would certainly seem, you know, to the analysis that we have of the economics, that currently catering are running at a small loss. But by the third year, so we'd be looking at 2016, now they should be running in profit anyway, as if that's based on analysis if nothing changes.
Well, the £500,000 in debt figure, which has come up recently, has only come up recently, and as far as I'm aware, basically the services were run by a number of different providers a few years ago, some of them university providers and some of them external private providers. They were brought in-house 2 or 3 years ago, and my understanding is that actually they were making good money then, and that one of the reasons for bringing them in-house was so that the surplus or the profits from those services could be reinvested in the university. So the £500,000 loss figure is a new one, which slightly contradicts what's been said earlier on about these services making money which could be reinvested in the university.
Second session is maximising university estates, cost savings and revenue opportunities.
I don't think that there's a particularly big difference between outsourcing and privatisation, and I think to a certain extent outsourcing is actually just a nice word for privatisation, but it's the fact that these are international companies that are basically built on creating a profit rather than serving a community. For me, this is definitely a case of privatisation rather than just outsourcing.
For me, that's a question I'm quite passionate about, because I find it extremely patronising, and I'm sick and tired of having John Duffy send letters to The Guardian claiming that this is no sell-off that is going off on Sussex University campus. This isn't privatisation. And he paraphrased the very notion of privatisation by saying, well, what we're doing at Sussex is we're seeking external partnerships with private providers to be able to provide these services that we have at the university. That, for me, sounds like privatisation.
There's a kind of false, I don't know if it's a dichotomy, but there's a false split between something being privatisation and something being outsourcing. The effect of both is to take an existing set of providers and exchange them for a global monopoly provider. And that's what's happening in the outsourcing here, and it's what happens in the privatisation of a particular public utility. The university is a semi-public organisation, which is why people can call it privatisation, or they can call it outsourcing. The effect is still the same.
I think it is a bit of a language issue. It really depends what you mean by privatisation. It's certainly true to say that the university is basically a private charity, as technically as an organisation. So it's a charitable, not-for-profit organisation outsourcing its services to a private, for-profit organisation. So it's a definite shift from not-for-profit to for-profit. And I think that's the most important thing.
So yeah, some students have questioned the fact that the Students' Union outsources some of the things that it does. So at present we're in partnership with a catering company called Blend Catering in both of our bars, and we also outsource some of our security for our events. And until this year we did also outsource some of our marketing, but we've actually decided this year to bring that back in-house because it just basically didn't work and it wasn't working for us and it was really, really inefficient. So in terms of the bars and what happens there, we work in partnership with a company called Blend Catering. The company is a local company, it's owned by 2 people, and both of those people work in our bars, and the staff are employed on great terms and conditions. With regards to the menus and the food that's actually served in the bars, it's us that sets the menus and it's us that sets the prices. So that's a genuine partnership. We haven't just outsourced our services and now we have no say in what they do and how they're run. In terms of the security, yes, it is outsourced, but it's outsourced because we can't really hire someone that's expected to just work a few events a year on a kind of full-time or part-time basis, and we haven't got the capability to do that, and it doesn't really make any sense to.
If you roll out austerity throughout a whole country, not only do you cause massive social problems, as we see, but actually it is massively economically counterproductive as well.
This is happening in a number of universities across the country, and at the moment it's happening in the context of administrative services, IT, library and other services. For example, there's a protest in Falmouth and Exeter going on at the moment in relation to the outsourcing of jobs there within the administrative sector. The key issue, I think, is also the fact that it won't stop here. So Universities UK, in their report of 2011, suggested that the outsourcing of administrative functions of the university was only the first phase, and the second phase would be the outsourcing of the academic functions of the university, i.e. the unbundling of lectures and seminars. So whereas lectures might still be given by academics within the universities, the seminars would be conducted through a private for-profit company offering tutorial support, for example. Now this hasn't happened yet, but this is what's being planned for within Universities UK themselves.
I mean, you can definitely draw links to wider processes happening around the country and around the world around how we deal with public utilities and how we provide public services. I think one of the interesting things that the campaign has articulated so well is that this is an issue around managerial power and the layer of kind of bureaucratic management of frontline staff, where frontline staff are no longer trusted to do the job, and instead it's always these new diktats coming from up above, and we see that in the NHS, and we see that happening here. And there's this idea that what is good for management is to have this one big sell-off, which they can then claim as their own, success story, which then they move on after 5 years to a new institution where they go and repeat this. I think it's either Duffy or Farthing who's come from another university where he's undergone a similar thing, and you're seeing these managerial kind of groups move from one body to the next body to the next body, selling off in the name of immediate kind of upfront capital creation a service, and then leaving it to the rest of the frontline staff to go and pick up the pieces. So in that sense, I do see it as a kind of a managerial move, which is something that campaigns articulated, I think, quite well. It's not just in the public sector and kind of semi-public sector you're seeing this. One of the interesting things with the financial crisis was that it was the senior management level of banks which took on the kind of decisions that led to the financial crisis, and yet now, in HBOS for example, it's the frontline staff, the ones who serve at the banks that we go to, and the cashier staff who are facing the brunt of the cuts, while the managerial layer walks away with their enormous bonuses. And it's that kind of trend that's replicated across both public and private bodies.
So the media attention that we've received, the early day motion with 25 MPs, the vast outcry across the country in support of the students and staff campaigning against privatisation at Sussex has been incredible, and that's all thanks to the occupation. We wouldn't be doing this film right now if it wasn't for the occupation. And I just came back from the National Union of Students conference that finished yesterday, and the amount of support for the Sussex occupation was incredible. You know, you'd have people from unions all across the country coming up to you and being like, oh, how can we support what you guys are doing at Sussex? I think it's incredible. I think it's so inspiring, etc., etc. And I think that's something in a national context that we have to bear in mind, is that privatisation isn't just relevant to Sussex University, and we need to address the serious democratic deficit that most universities in the country have. I think the student reaction has very much been reflective of the good relationship and the concern that students have for the staff that provide these essential services. And so throughout this process it's been a series of dialogues between students and staff to see what they want out of the student opinion and movement. And we've had, since September, we were having weekly meetings between students and staff, and you know, sometimes they would have 70 people, sometimes they would have 20, depending on the week. But continuously, it was students reaching out to staff and saying, well, what do you want us to do? Throughout the entire year, it's been, please support us as much as possible. Talk to journalists, talk to MPs, talk to anyone that can actually spread the word about what is going on. And I think it was really with the occupation that we managed to reach that staff desire to its full extent. I mean, you know, getting that early day motion in Parliament with 25 MPs has been insane.
The Stop Privatisation campaign at the University of Sussex is made up of all manner of different people. There's this myth that it's made up of a small minority of students who are like full-time activists.
These people are primarily students, but they're also members of faculty. They are members of the 235. It is an eclectic group from different courses, from different backgrounds, from different ages, from different political ideologies that have come together over the same subject. They want to save what Sussex is and what makes Sussex great, and that's the Sussex community.
I'm absolutely amazed by the campaign. I think the student campaign has been something that's inspired a lot of people. I know it's the kind of talk of the office often, what's happening about these people, but I think the students in the campaign have shown an incredible determination, incredible creativity with their campaign, and what they've done is opened a whole community of people. I'm speaking to people that normally I would only speak to through my job, and it's created this whole sense of belonging too. And I imagine within the student group that's very, very strong, because they've appeared to be enormously supportive of each other. So to have this sense of community back, it's a bit like, you know, when you're in darkness and somebody shines a torch, that your kind of attention is focused on what the torch is showing. But in a weird way, it also reminds you of the darkness that you're actually standing in. And it's had both those effects. So it's kind of directed my attention to something that's happening here, but also directed my attention back to myself and how I am, so that I may have felt a bit like the people who sit in front of the television, and when something bad happens they will grumble at it, and somehow the grumbling about it is enough. It's confirmed that I'm an alright kind of person to have this view, but it's suddenly kind of woken me up as well, and I've started looking around at other issues as well. I've never had such a positive feeling when I come in on a Monday morning. You know, I'm pretty grouchy on a Monday morning, but I really want to be here to see what's happening. And I think a lot of us who work here and are part of this community just owe them a great vote of thanks, really.
That's the most beautiful. Yeah.